Good day, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Inside Reality. I'm Jeffrey Candelaria, and my co host and producer is Jimmy Tran, and we dare to peek at truth. I, for one, don't believe in immutable truth. My partner does, but we dare peek at topics like what is morality, what are ethics, what is society going to look like in 20 years. And today's topic, we're going to broach a couple of things, right, Jimmy? We're going to talk
Yep.
about me being older than you and a product of the baby boomer generation. We were forced to collide with other people that didn't look like us, that we didn't know, that had different cultural proclivities, and engage in contact. And by doing so, I would argue we created, the baby boomers and before us, created a certain civility because we had to collide with people we didn't look like. If we were on a train, if we were in line somewhere, if we wanted to order food at a restaurant, those kinds of collisions, in my view, actually engendered true diversity and true civility, unlike being uh, imprisoned by a phone where algorithms, in a sense, can force people to live insulary lives. And anyway, yeah, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that. Welcome to the show and producing the show, Mr. Jimmy Tran, Inside Reality.
Hey, Jeffrey, good to see you again. Thanks for being a part of this
Sure.
conversation. As always, we're always looking for good and better ways to connect and communicate. And so, I mean, part of the show's vision of the show is that, right, to stimulate those conversations to get us talking.
Talking about
Uh,
obvious things that
Obvious
people don't
things,
talk about.
exactly,
Yeah, right.
exactly.
So I'd like your perspective, but let me kind of build a framework and then you insert yourself into the conversation.
Sure.
So when I was growing up, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have immediate gratification. If we wanted a pizza, we'd actually have to drive somewhere, go into the store, talk to people that didn't look like us all the time, uh, that were different age groups, for example, for possibly, and engage with that person to order a pizza, right? So you had all these steps that you had to take. I'm not saying it was convenient because it wasn't, but the absence of convenience forced people like me and older people to collide with other people and actually engage with them, look them in the eye. Did you want pepperoni? Do you want green chili? Whatever. And you'd have to actually talk to someone. And then you might have to talk to someone else who, did you want that to go? Did you want this? You might have to talk to a third person to pay for the transaction. Again, none of this was convenient, but I'm arguing that in doing so, we were forced to have a certain level of civility and order in order to just function as a society. And that's just ordering a pizza, for example, right?
Yeah.
If I went to a train or an airline, I'd have to, again, talk to somebody, stand in line next to somebody. Not everybody's looking at their damn phones because we didn't have phones. So, guess what people did? They talked to each other.
Yeah.
And now I would argue because of algorithms. Yesterday, I bought a pickleball paddle, and how many commercials have I received about pickleball, right? So now, algorithms, I would argue, almost force people or are conducive to people liking and living with groups, messaging, and almost a worldview that's consistent with what they said they put forth in the first place to create an algorithm, right? So
Yeah.
people are liking these little insulated bubbles, and I would argue your age and younger, by design. A lot of it's convenience, a lot of it's commercially driven. But people like me, I'm blessed that I was able to collide with people that didn't look like me throughout my life. I would go to a library, order a book, and have to talk to a librarian and then talk to another person who would help me with the card and go to the index and get the book and go sit down and maybe sit down next to somebody that didn't look like me and maybe even say hello, whispering, of course, again, engaging with people, unlike this all the time, right?
Yeah.
So it's just sort of a, a thought about the insulary lifestyle versus the colliding lifestyle that I'm used to, that, in my view, engendered more civility and order. Because without civility and order, we couldn't function.
Yeah.
So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
No. So first off, it's a great question. It's definitely a conversation that I think that a lot of people are having today, more so probably than ever.
Right.
I mean, what you're describing is what's referred to as an echo chamber, right? I mean, so you're politically on the right, and so therefore everything that you see is centered around that
Yeah.
world. And then if you're on the left, same thing.
Yeah.
You see that. And for marketing purposes, those things are created and derived because it's easy, right? And you sell to the same group of people, or the people that are most likely you're going to buy that stuff, you're going to get more sales. So some of those mechanisms, like what you're talking about, you look for paddle, the paddle and so forth. Then all of a sudden, all these paddles, shows up, right? I
And
mean,
not just paddles, but everything that
everything related
surrounds
to it.
the
Exactly,
pickleball world. Like, would you like to join this pickleball group? Here,
exactly,
would you like to have this pickleball app? So
correct,
now it's for the algorithm is in a sense inserting itself
correct.
as a worldview almost for just that particular proclivity that I might have or whomever
Yes,
might have.
yeah,
So again, it's forcing folks, in my view, in a sense, not to truly engage in diversity, in eclecticness, in curiosity, in anything outside the person's convenient agenda fraught with their own set of proclivities and likes
yeah.
and desirables.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, there's a lot of things that on a natural level, right, will lead us to deal with people that are like us, just, people that we can connect with, relate with. I mean, obviously that's definitely part of what you're talking about here. And I think that you're correct in that observation, because I think that we are, I mean, we have a whole generation, literally, that, like you were saying, that their whole world is just online. Okay,
Yeah.
for the first time ever, we literally have a generation where, from birth until wherever they're at now, is completely online. Right. I
Yes.
mean, I live kind of in this hybrid world where I had a little bit in the early days where it was in this offline world, and then really the rest of my life has been kind of online.
Yeah.
So, but but I've but at the same time, for me anyway, that I got enough of the world, part where it wasn't just online. Now, even then, it wasn't so easy, on many front, being uh, a child of immigrant and so forth, growing up in a world and in a culture that I don't always fully understand, at that age, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so that raises its own challenges, I think. And I think that that's part of the reason why these type of tools were developed, was to try to kind of fill that gap. But then again, just like most things, right, you get a tool, and then all of a sudden that tool gets used in a broader sense, and you end up
I would argue
creating
that this
the challenge.
technology wasn't built to ameliorate or improve society. I think it was strictly built for the purposes of commercialism. And it's worked beautifully for
Mm,
what it was designed for. I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, I grew up in a blighted area. If I wanted to go play golf, I think my brother and I would go. We were, 12, 13. We'd go to Puerto del Sol by the airport. Again, we're two little kids. We couldn't just play virtual golf, right?
yeah,
So, first of all, we're literally getting out of the house. We're engaging in a physical activity. We're actually doing something called golf. And we're forced to talk to these adults that didn't look like us because they were mostly white, elitists. No offense, I liked them, but that's what they were, probably making 100,000 plus. And you're asking them, little kids like us from a blighted area, how do we do this, sir? So they're telling us, well, you have to rent a golf club and you have to get some golf balls.
sure,
But by doing so, we're learning social engagement. We're learning
yeah,
social skills. We're learning to talk to people that don't look like us. We're actually personifying curiosity, activity. I would argue we're learning the fulfillment of life because we're actually doing something outdoors we've never done instead of just doing it at your home, eating a pizza, playing virtual golf, which, by the way, isn't really playing golf. So a lot of things happened and I'm blessed to have gone through those experiences. Was it uncomfortable? Was it awkward? Yes. But look what it provided. and I ended up making friends with one of the guys later on. Years later, I saw him. We became friends. He's a golf pro. He's deceased now, but it was a relationship based on a little kid
Yeah.
going to play, golf at a 9-hole golf place, by the airport in Albuquerque, New Mexico, because we were forced to do it if we wanted to play golf.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely part of it, right? I mean, like for instance, I'll use an analogy to that, right? I mean, in our world, in business and networking, right, we have a business card that we give, right? And so if I give you a business card, or you give me a business card, it's physically in my hand, right? And I have it, and it's convenient. Now, of course, if I lose it, obviously I can't connect with you, right? But if I lose it, let's say on my desk somewhere, and everything gets piled on, right? At some point when I clear my desk or whatever, I'll encounter that again,
Yeah.
right? But on the flip side, if you gave me a digital card and I gave you a digital card, right, it literally would disappear because there's not a trigger that has that physical connection that you would accidentally bump into. Same thing with books, right? You can have 1,000 books in one little device like your phone, right? Or you have 1,000 books that's on a shelf, right, that you have to physically interact with and deal with. Or if it's on the floor, you got to, you'll trip over it, right? So the physicality does have that element to where it actually punch you in the face, so to speak, right? In metaphorically speaking, with the business card or the books, the same way that you're talking about when you're talking about this collision of relationships, whether whoever it is, however it is.
I would call it not necessarily engagement, but collision of at least engagement with people.
Yeah.
You have to engage.
And yeah.
Or we had to engage.
Well, we do and we don't. I mean, we can ignore the person, right?
No, I'm talking about my generation pre-technology.
No,
if I called my girlfriend, her dad would answer. So
Sure.
now I'm engaging with an authority figure who was suspicious of me or cynical of me or liked me, whatever.
Yeah.
So now I have to go through that gauntlet of awkwardness, the maladroitness of talking to this guy. And I was dating a Lebanese chick, so he was very patriarchal and macho and from a different culture. So now I had to walk through or experience that gauntlet just to get to her.
Yeah.
But I would argue that made me stronger. It made me wiser. It was a more enriched overall experience.
Yeah.
Than having a direct textual conversation with somebody who lives thousands of miles away.
Sure.
Who you think you like because you saw her photo.
Yeah. Well, and the photo can be, manipulated these days with all kinds of stuff now, especially with AI and stuff like that too. Now, even in that example that you just gave, I mean, the fact that you have to have this encounter, right, force you to have to deal with a certain sense of that reality, right?
Yes.
That we don't necessarily have to do because you can just ghost somebody, right? You can't ghost somebody when.
What does ghost somebody mean?
Ghost somebody meaning that.
I don't know what that means.
So in the modern vernacular, okay, ghosting is where, let's say I would text you and you just never respond to me, right? You just kind of basically give me the silent treatment by never really responding to me. And so that's kind of the term, what ghosting means, right? You just disappear, even though we had this initial.
Wait. So you're trying to get a hold of me through the new technology, if you will, and I don't respond to you by design. So I'm a phantom now. I'm a specter. I'm a ghost.
I mean, let's say well, there's a first part of that, which is let's say we had a conversation. Like, let's say I'm texting you and you texting me back and forth. And then all of a sudden you just disappear where I'm texting you once a day for the next 3 days and you still haven't responded to me, right? That's what ghosting kind of represents.
Well, that further makes my point, because as a baby boomer, when I was in a group and I knew you sort of, and I started talking to you, not texting you, talking to you, and we liked each other, we didn't like each other. I was racist toward you. You were racist toward me. I had a proclivity against Chinese people. You had a proclivity against Spanish people. Whatever it might be.
Sure.
You know how we ghosted each other? We ignored you.
Yeah.
But you were still physically at school or at the softball game, or you were on my team. I simply didn't talk to you. So you and I created space away from each other.
Yeah.
Physical. So it comes back to the physical. There's a physical element, whether it's nonverbal communication, whether it's two physical beings. in a context, spatial context, and the relationship to that spatial context, whether it's nonverbal cues, I'm giving you a dirty look, you're giving me a dirty look, so we stay
Yeah,
away from each other. But it was all very visceral. It was human.
it
And I
is.
would argue
Yeah.
that's a good thing overall. And I think we're void of a lot of that because of this. We can avoid people by doing what you just said, ghosting them, and never see them again. Never give them any energy whatsoever.
Yep.
I don't think that's good for society overall.
I think that there's a place. I think like most things, there's a place for everything. Like if you're in a bad relationship, right? And this person is very clingy, right? Type of relationship where every moment of your day, you're constantly having to respond to this person. You know, maybe it is healthy to kind of just disappear for a little bit, right? And so I don't know. I mean, you physically.
Well, somebody was stalking me, I guess, you could argue I guess the technology provides a
insulation
way
there,
to thwart them from your
you can just put the
being.
hit. This is a spam, and then it goes into this box that never comes, to reality again. Now, I can imagine a day when we hand it off to our AI that then takes over in terms of responding to that person, right? In whatever way that we want to deliberate on that person, whether we want to say, okay, we pass it to this AI, and the AI can take it to a very, very like serious level of sarcasm or whatever, right?
Anyway, you're listening to or watching Inside Reality, where we talk about these obvious topics, but we try to do it in an intelligent way. We also use some dialectic methodology, because you tend to take opposite positions than I do, and that's good. So we're actually dissecting things from the various parts of the spectrum of a particular conversational construct perspective. I'm Jeffrey Candelaria. This is Jimmy Tran. We launch and drop these shows every Thursday. Please subscribe. Tell your friends. I think it's a very interesting show. But getting back to the topic at hand again, we're talking about how technology is, from my perspective as a baby boomer, created almost an artificial subsistence worldviews, and also insulated lifestyle constructs. And also, what really bugs me and really irritates the hell out of me, and I'm a reluctant conservative, as we've talked about, but the very far left of the political spectrum tends to always argue about diversity and equity and inclusion. But I would argue that those that are part of this technology are actually embracing people, worldviews, situations, a perspective that's consistent with what they think the world should look like, and only the world should sort of look like, and are truly not tasting the true diversity of other perspectives, other people that don't look or think like them, and even other experiences. Those dumb little glasses people wear, like they're bowling or something. Like, get your fat ass off a couch and go bowl. Or they're running, but they're not really running. Get your butt off of couch and go run. I'm blessed that I was able to do those things: climbing trees, getting stung by a bee, climbing a wall, falling off, cutting my finger. That's the beauty of life, in my view, that I think a lot of population either doesn't know, they're uncomfortable with it, they're inconvenienced by it, or they just don't want to experience it because it's too damn hard. What's good about that?
Well, there's another element to that too. I mean, I think that, so the algorithm that you're talking about, right, where we end up creating this echo chamber of ideas or even experiences. I mean, that is definitely one thing that is, I would say, have a very strong negative impact on society. Okay, from a sociological and relational standpoint.
Expand on that.
Like what you were saying earlier, you have this political view. Okay, so that means that everything gets served to you are within this political view. Okay, so I think that the algorithm, of course, is trying to get more views, more participation and so forth. And so that's one of the reasons, again, it's the driver of it is making money, right? And so the driver is to sell you something. So if you were looking for pickleball, like you were saying earlier, that means that you have entered into this ecosystem, right?
Yes.
This world of pickleball. So everything that's related to pickleball is going to have some interest to you. If I give you something or showed you something or give you an ad about sewing, I mean, it's not gonna get anywhere, and you're not gonna, and so if I'm a retailer trying to sell sewing machines and needles and threads and stuff, you're not going to respond to that because it's not related, right? And
Nothing
or not
sedentary. I don't like
exactly
sedentary stuff. Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is that there's that part, right? I think that on the technology side, the algorithm could actually be built to do something different, where if you say something, let's say you're watching something that's politically leaning one direction, right? The algorithm could be programmed to now give you a counter view of that. Okay, so it serves up kind of this kind of.
But that's an ideal. Nobody wants that. People don't engage in curiosity,
some do.
critical thinking.
Well, some do.
Exactly,
yeah. I mean, there's actually a news website that does that, and I'm going to be pursuing them and seeing if we can get them to be a sponsor for our show, because they do have a
so
program.
You're telling me the average person who's sitting down eating a pizza, who's a liberal, whatever, and likes Biden or whatever the hell it is, would accept an algorithm that would actually have a pro-Trump, look what he did today that was good perspective? And you're telling me people would opt into that? No way.
I'm not
going to happen.
Maybe not by default that people would want that. I'm not saying that not everyone wants that. Obviously, we want to talk to somebody. We want to hear something that agrees with us, right? We don't want to, I mean, I'm maybe you and I are a little different, and maybe our at least our audience, right? If you're subscribed to this podcast and you're watching this podcast, you're probably one of the few that want to look at the different perspectives that are out there about something, right? And so there are some, I think. I mean, that's why we have this podcast.
They're going to look at a different perspective. I think what they're looking to do, in my view, is at least dive deeper into a topic instead of all the cliches and platitudes. Like, when people say, Republicans only are for the rich or some stupid political platitude like that. We dive deeper into that. And I would argue, just very briefly, what's wrong with being rich? Maybe that rich person deserved to be rich, and maybe they created a lot of jobs and a lot of wealth. Okay. So that's just a quick example of diving deeper into a platitude. Yeah. That's what this show does. Yeah. I think.
Well, and what's interesting is that, I mean, that might have been true at one point in history of the United States in particular, but actually my understanding from statistics is that most of the billionaire and millionaire people, the one that are ultra wealthy, are actually very liberal, not conservative.
That's a good point.
So
Soros, Elon Musk used to be fairly liberal. Yeah,
exactly. Absolutely. So and there's a different reason. I mean, I have my speculation on why that is the case. I mean, a lot of time is because when you have a liberal mindset, right, it just means that you're open to ideas, you're open to new ways and different ways of thinking, right? Traditional industries and so forth.
It used to be that way.
Yeah.
Now they've dissected themselves such that everybody's in a box. Are you Chinese? Sure. Are you lesbian? Are you transgender? Are you black? Are you this?
Yeah.
Or that? So then they put you in these little boxes.
Yeah.
And there's no room for any true eclectic experience.
Correct.
A diverse experience.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're going off on a little bit of a tangent. I wanted you to come back to the algorithm construct.
Well, I think it's related because the algorithm is what sets the stage in a sense, right? Because again, going back to the intention of these applications and these systems, right, is because they want to, their intention is to help serve you better, right, and to make more money, So those are all the different dialectical elements related to it, right? I mean, if you're on one of the platforms like YouTube, for instance, right, like where we have this podcast, right? All the videos that's off to the side here are going to be somewhat related in some ways, and probably going to be in certain political alignment to what we're talking about. Now, we make it hard because our conversation kind of swing very broadly
It's
across
dialectic. It's all over.
and so as a result, the algorithm is going to have a hard time trying to figure out where to place what type of content to place. Now, of course, whoever's watching the show, obviously, that person has their own universe as well that the algorithm will match up against. And so even though they're watching our show, they'll show other things that are probably more related to the person that there. Now, our show may not actually be recommended because of this, right? Because if it can't put you into this box, into this bucket, they won't probably recommend our show to those individuals on either side of it. And that's just part of the unfortunate. And I think that's why I'm saying that the algorithm should have a feature to allow us to say, hey, look, no holds bar. Let me just have whatever comes up that, and maybe that is one way to kind of address this.
What I'm trying to get at, the overarching point is, as a baby boomer and older folks, I'm blessed that I had to go if I wanted buy a new car, right? And I bought several new cars in my life when I was younger. I'd go to a parking lot or a dealership.
Sure.
And the sharks would come at me. That was like an algorithm. Like 7. They were all just sitting there waiting for someone to show up. You know, and I was well dressed. So like, oh, this guy's a prospect. So I had like 7 salesmen at the time, mostly, just basically converging upon me. That's an algorithm, right? They're all like, oh, he wants to buy a car. But I had to deal with that. And it was a good experience because I had to learn how to negotiate. I had to figure out which person I wanted to work with. I had to figure out what car, I wanted to walk toward, what color. Oh, we only had so much inventory. I think that just made me and made my population, others, truly engaging in a diverse, eclectic, a little bit of an uncomfortable, but it made me wiser and smarter and more fulfilled experience than I want a 2024 red convertible Volvo with this whatever. I don't have to talk to anybody really. And the car's delivered right to me. I mean, so you're creating this insulated artificial lifestyle that doesn't force one to collide with other people, good, bad, or ugly. And I don't know how that can be good for the human condition. Other than convenience.
Okay.
And immediate, gratification.
So what it sounds like, you're really not talking so much about the algorithm relationship, more so about the struggles that we have to actually encounter in life. And in particular, this is dealing with the relationship part of life. Okay. So, I mean, we do know that sociologically speaking, what you're describing is important because there's, I think, experiments, I think done with a butterfly, right? If I remember this correctly, where, how the butterfly is, first a caterpillar and then it cocoons itself. And then when it's ready to come out of that cocoon, then it literally crawls out of it, right? But there's a struggle that it needs to go through, right? Yes. It happens with birds as well, getting out of the egg shell. Well, my understanding from some of the experiments that were done or observations that were done on this is that if you were to cut open that cocoon and just let the butterfly come out with, out of that, it literally doesn't survive very long after. And that was true, I think, with birds as well. I mean, I don't remember the specific. So the struggle itself was actually part of the experience that these particular animals needed. And so what you're talking about is simply that when it comes to civilization and civility and relationships. And I agree with you in that regard.
It's not just a struggle though, because when we were having to collide with people, whether we're buying a car, ordering a pizza,
it doesn't have to be in a disagreement.
Going to a bowling alley, what kind of bowling ball do you want? We go talk to a shoe lady. You know what happens? You're talking to people based on having to go through the gauntlet of struggle and inconvenience. And guess what happens sometimes? You actually make friends.
Yeah.
I met so many girlfriends just by somebody working at a donut shop, or I don't eat donuts, but whatever it was, whatever store I went to, because I was talking to someone.
Yeah.
People don't talk to people. I know I'm making a very general sweeping statement, but because of the algorithm, insulary, artificial, everybody echo chamber looks and thinks like me experience, I don't think people talk to people that don't share their own kind of worldview, echo chamber experiences. And I don't think that's a good thing. I just
Yeah.
don't.
Well, there's there's two things that you say, or maybe even three things that you're talking about there. One is that I don't think that people are necessarily looking to only talk to people, even in the physical interactions. It's just that people are just less talking to each other in general,
Well,
whether they're in
also
agreement or
less
not.
skilled at doing that.
Correct, and that's
And they're
one
more
part.
uncomfortable. It's sort of it's a weird cycle because I'm uncomfortable talking because I was never skilled and trained to
Yeah,
do it.
yeah,
And I don't need to do it because I have this. I don't
yes,
need to do it.
yeah. I mean, that's the different parts, right? I mean, I know that for me personally, I grew up when I was growing up, I was very shy, even though and part of the shyness that I had was because I struggle with the language, and so forth, right? And so as a result, I was intimidated a lot of the time because of that, right?
Yeah.
So that factored in, and so if it wasn't because I started my own business, okay, if it wasn't because I was kind of put into a position where I had to go through and do that, right? And I even did it intentionally where I took drama class. I mean that, talk about being uncomfortable, right? I mean,
Right.
I mean, when I was in college, I intentionally took drama classes so that I can learn the art of interaction and the art of communication and so forth, because that was part of my desire to better myself. Now, does that mean everybody does that? I don't think that everybody would choose that path because it was a struggle. I mean, it took me a long time to get to even where I'm at, and I still at times dealing with
You
it.
keep using the word struggle. I would argue it's concomitant with also being uncomfortable too.
Well, yes,
Awkward.
but
It's not just a
agree.
struggle. It's
Well,
awkward. It's uncomfortable. It's inconvenient.
when
They're all those things.
when I'm saying struggle, I'm talking about the internal experience that I have to go through mentally, emotionally, and so forth
Dissonance.
to engage. Okay. Kind of like, I mean, like in business, right? You stand up there and especially in networking group, right? You give your 30-second commercial, right? It's one of the most uncomfortable thing for me, right? And I don't know if that's the case for everybody, but I do know that from statistically speaking, people are afraid public speaking way more than they are afraid of dying even. Death is like the most, they rather die than actually speak in public. So we do know that sociologically, that is one of the big struggles that people have. And I think that that's part of, to me, to answer your question about why we, because these tools like these phones and these devices gives us an excuse to not, right? I mean, and that's part of what I'm saying about the struggle is that we have that internal struggle. So we go towards the easy. Now, what you're saying is that when we do have that interaction, it doesn't have to be a struggle. And I agree with you on that. And I think that that type of interaction could be anything. It could just be the pleasantry of the weather, right? And either agree or disagree. And maybe we both agree that, hey, it's getting hot out there now, or getting, why are we getting snow in May or April or whatever, right?
So I don't know that I'm not fixated with the word struggle as you are. Last Friday night, usually Friday nights, I go out, have a couple of drinks and hang out with my friends or just do what I want to do. So I went to a bar, BAR, right? Bar. And I like sitting at the bar. Do you know why I like sitting at the bar?
Pick up women?
No, I'm married. I do flirt, but no, because you're sitting next to people that you don't know.
Sure.
Okay. I like the dynamic of a bar. When you're sitting at a table, generally at a restaurant, you're again isolated. You're looking at somebody that you probably thinks like you or looks like you. Again, the whole stupid echo chamber nonsense. I like inserting myself into, and maybe it's just me, but I would argue it's because our baby boomer proclivity doesn't make us feel it's that big a struggle or that uncomfortable or that awkward to insert ourselves in a place where I'm sitting next to two people. I have no idea who the hell they are, but we're there, right? And guess what I did?
You talked to them.
I talked to the guy on both sides. I made friends with the guy.
Yeah.
Friends, probably too hyperbolic a term. I made an acquaintance.
Yeah.
We exchanged numbers. I even sold a book to somebody there by talking to them.
Sure.
Again, I would argue that's civility. That's a sociology experiment unfolding that was organic, and it led to, and by the way, both people about my age, yes, true,
Yeah.
but both of them, again, maybe a little bit same socioeconomic status and educational level. So maybe there was a weird algorithm going on there too, right? That's wired inside of me that I wanted to sit next to people that were my age or something. And by the way, I'm going to a bar in a certain part of the city, right? So there's a certain demographic. It's going to attract a certain kind of crowd. So maybe I am a little bit of a hypocrite, in the sense that I'm inserting myself into a marketplace, into an ecosystem, into a restaurant or a bar positioned in a place I knew that people were going to be more educated, a little more upper middle class, and maybe even my age, and more willing to talk to people like me. So maybe I'm thrusting myself into the same algorithm, but I'm doing it organically, viscerally. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Physically. And I would argue that that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, it is a good thing when it comes to social interactions and so forth, right? I mean, now imagine that same scenario, right? But instead, that person had a different political perspective, or they don't have the same perspective, not necessarily politically, but then just, yeah.
Because I mentioned Trump, that I voted for Trump, and he gave me a bad, oh, I can't believe it. But we moved beyond that. Again,
Sure.
We're baby boomers. We didn't fixate on, okay, you voted for Biden, and I thought he's an idiot for doing so, but I didn't let that be the anchor to basically position him as somebody I never want to engage with. I'm like, some people, they're an anchor, they move away from that. That person's still there, you're over there ideologically.
Yeah. Well, conversation is what you had.
We moved it on. We moved beyond that.
Well, and that's the part that I think is missing, is that you willing first off to be vulnerable by being there and having that engaging that conversation.
I would call it awkward. It's not uncomfortable. It's awkward.
Yeah.
It's a little awkward.
But then you were willing to actually have a conversation.
10 minutes.
Yeah. You're actually willing to have that conversation. That's the next part that's important, that is missing in a lot of things. And then of course the third part of that is that you're willing to say, okay, we can agree to disagree kind of on a level where we can move on. We don't have to focus on just that, right? Even though politics is, like you said before in our previous shows, like politics is everything. To an extent, is everything, right? It's involved, it impacts everything. But at the same time, but we also get to choose whether those things have an impact or not, right? I mean, that's the part that I think that we often forget.
Unlike the extreme right and the extreme left, I don't let it define me.
Yeah.
It's part of who I am. I'm convicted, because I do believe in self-reliance. Life's not fair. Accountability. If you're fat, you eat too many donuts, go on a diet. I'm a hard ass about that. But
sure,
when I talk to even someone like you, we have disagreements. We focus on other things, you and I.
Yeah.
That we like, that we agree on, that we can come to terms with. It's not like your position ideologically defines you, mine defines me, and there's no space
that we
for
can
any engagement, any interaction, friendship, acquaintanceship, colleagueship, doing business. I know people that don't do business with people like me because I voted for Trump. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's absurd. Because I remember, again, being a baby boomer, we went to a bowling alley. I didn't ask the guy. Back then, it wasn't so much about who did you vote for. I promise you.
Yeah. Well, let's take that. Let's dissect that part for a moment. I know that we have another.
This is Inside Reality, folks. Jeffrey Candelaria, Jimmy Tran. It's a very unusual podcast because we talk about obvious things, and we try to dissect, these obvious constructs. Today, we're talking about the social construct of people living insular lives because of technology. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I know we wanted to talk another topic too, but I think that I want to dissect a little bit about what you just said there. So I think that some would say, well, we should stand for what we believe on and so forth. So how do we find or strike a balance between those things? Because certainly when we buy from somebody that we don't agree with, that's not an issue. But when we support, I mean, there's different levels of support a cause or support a situation, somebody that is supporting another, you know what I'm saying? I mean, there's that final, here's an example, right? I mean,
Not sure what you mean.
if let's say this person has a business and he's not paying his employees, right? He's slave laboring his employee for whatever. And you find out about it. Okay. I mean, obviously you probably wouldn't buy from him, right? I mean, even if,
Oh yeah,
he's a friend.
No,
I mean, and things like that.
I have a hard time buying certain kind of shoes that are made in China because of child
Exactly.
labor. I have
Exactly.
a hard time with that.
So where is that line? Because that some of those are defined, like you were saying earlier. I mean, okay, you voted for Trump. Okay, fine. Okay, so I shouldn't do business with you because you voted for Trump. Well, that isn't a good enough reason, in my opinion, to not vote for somebody or to not do business with somebody.
The Trump ideology doesn't define everything I am. It's a part of it, but it's not all of me.
So I guess that's my question, is that where would you say is the line where we should really be looking at?
If I were purchasing from someone that was dogmatic about their political conviction on either side, I would have a hard time supporting or patronizing them. See, it's where it becomes dogmatic and monolithic in thinking.
Yeah.
Even if it's a conservative, I'm not going to go to a whacked out conservative hyper MAGA business, that has MAGA stuff all around, because I'm not a MAGA guy.
Sure.
I lean a little bit on that side of the perspective. I think Trump's a bit of a megalomaniac, but I like overall his policies overall.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be supporting anyone that tends to be dogmatic. That's their doctrine. Everything pretty much they look through is the dogmatic lens. That's why I had to leave the church, because it's so my experience was the churches and the doctrine I was raised with. It's hyper dogmatic. It's awful.
But isn't that what isn't that what religion or construct is? Or, how would you,
usually, well, no, there are certain religions that tend to be a little bit more, have a little more breadth, like horizontal openness to interpretation, I guess, of something called a deity.
Yeah.
But there are certain religions that are extremely dogmatic. If you dare to transgress, you're going to hell, or, you've got to say 1,000 rosaries and all this nonsense. And yet the, what is over in the, where in Rome, living an opulent lifestyle, doesn't have to drive a car, gets 15 meals a day. It's just the hypocrisy of the opulence of certain religious constructs that are supposed to be serving the meek and the poor and all that. And yet those that have the authority and power are living, in aristocracy and opulence.
Yeah. That is,
in palatial environments.
Yeah. Well, what you're really against is really the hypocrisy of the whole, rather than just even.
Well, I don't mind. I don't mind hypocrisy. I'm a little bit of a hypocrite, because I have certain technologies myself, but I'm aware of it. And again, I admit it, and it doesn't define me. What I hate about, I shouldn't say hate, what I really get ticked off is when people have power and influence and make policy that affects other people but doesn't affect them. They won't admit that they're shielded from
the impact of that change,
promulgating and espousing. Just admit it. Like Trump the other day said, well, if I get that plane, what's wrong with accepting a gift? You can argue that he should or shouldn't accept the plane. It's not really him accepting it, but I have on behalf of the country, you know what I'm talking about. But what I like about him, he's transparent about it. He's like, I'm taking it. You don't like it? I'm still. What other people of power have done in the past is they would have surreptitiously maybe, absconded with the plane or taken the plane, not said anything, again, I don't justify it, but at least I like the fact that he tends to be more directly transparent about his self-absorption.
Yeah.
So about 5 minutes, big fella.
All right. So okay, let's dive a little deeper there. So if we were to be a hypocrite, right, or we choose to, so you're saying that as long as we are aware that we're doing that I mean, if we're
I didn't
absorbed.
say it makes it right,
Okay.
but
I'm not saying making it right. That's
at
not my
least it
question.
makes it, at least it makes it a
Palatable?
little bit more palatable, is all. I'm a hypocrite. I'm not a hyper hypocrite, but I do hypocritical things. So do you. So do all people.
We
Let's
all.
face it.
I mean, that's
But
the
I
reality.
try to
Yeah.
be aware of it, and I just like let you know that this is like, I live in a white dominant architecture lifestyle, right? Upper middle class, white dominant architected lifestyle. Yet at the same time on this show, I've admitted the country has been racist and predominantly white dominant driven. And I think there is something to be said for white supremacy in certain populations that exist in our country. So I'm a little bit of a hypocrite for embracing that lifestyle, which I like. I like the lifestyle that most white society created for us, for me and my wife. So there's my hypocrisy.
Well, I don't know. Well, I don't think that that's necessarily hypocrisy. To me, hypocrisy is where you're saying one thing and you're going to do the opposite of that one thing. Not necessarily saying that you're going to do something that happens to be either unpopular or whatever. I mean, to me, I don't see that as being hypocrisy where you're, because you're not making this blanket statement that white people are racist, and so But
let's do this. We got about 3 minutes. Why don't you talk about one of your hypocrisies as we conclude the show?
One of my hypocrisies
that you live, that you personify.
I don't have any. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I've shared with you. I mean, I have to think about that. Well, the reason is because not because I don't have hypocrisy, is just that I don't look at my life in that way, right? I try to be very open and transparent, and I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. However, I do say things maybe sometime more salient. I'm not like, I just don't say it on the top of my mind. Things like that, right? I mean, I sometimes I wish I could just blurt it out when I see something, right? But I don't. I end up being very diplomatic in how I say things. Like even right now, as I'm describing this, right? Yeah. I know that drives some people like yourself.
Inside reality, but that's because I.
So I guess you can say that, But I mean, I might be thinking, like that's like stupid, but I'm not going to say that's stupid, right, to somebody. Well, that's not my style, right?
It's not your nature.
My nature, maybe, or whatever, and that's just not.
So maybe that
default.
Should be another show we should do. My nature is to be, I'm an alpha, very provocative, and so very direct. So my behavior is my nature. So maybe that would be a good show. Do people live their nature? I would argue a lot of people don't. They're afraid to actually let their nature peek out. Remember the Spock thing on the old Star Trek, his nature versus, the emotional piece of him, which was really inside of him at the very depth of his essence, but he had a hard time letting that peek out because of the veneer of logic and the costume he was wearing. Was important to him even more than maybe his emotional piece. Well,
not only that, but Spock as a character was unique because he was both human and Vulcan. So he had both within him. So he had to choose which side he wanted to bring forth. So that's another part too. He
still chose the costume he wore.
Sure.
And in a sense, sublimated, I guess is the word, maybe, or repressed. The emotional part. And if you watch the show, some of the most poignant moments by itself were when Spock revealed his vulnerable emotional side. Okay, folks, that's it. Any concluding thoughts? Inside Reality. I'm Jeffrey Candelaria. Subscribe. We're with you every week, and we talk about these really obvious topics, but we dissect them. Any final thoughts, Jimmy?
In terms of this particular topic, I think in terms of this particular topic, I think that, we do ourselves a disservice when we try to do too much to smooth things out and make things kind of, and then that's part of the problem, right? When there's no struggle and I'm talking about the struggle for the person that's having to go through it, then when we make it too easy, you end up diluting things and nothing comes of it. So that's one part.
Divorce yourself of this at least 5 or 6 times a day and engage with people, collide with people. 30 seconds.
Yeah. So I did want to bring up one thing that I did not, that I've been kind of chewing on me a little bit.
25 seconds.
In our previous episode where we were talking about racism and so forth, right? One of the premise I like to put out there, and I'm going to throw this out and we can circle back to it again, is that I think that the US is actually, by design, is supposed to be the least racist of all the countries in the world historically. Now, by implementation and so forth, it may not have happened, and
the
we can definitely
not so much. Thank you again, Inside Reality, Jimmy Tran, Jeffrey Candelaria.
Subscribe, follow us, and support us. We're on Patreon. We're going to give you some other options to support us. So see you next time. Bye-bye.